Welcome to our panelists and welcome to our viewers who are tuning in from all around the world. Thank you for joining us today in the commemoration of the International Women's Day at the PIH Women's Lead event. My name is Jimena Maza and I'm joining you for Chiapas, Mexico, and I'm the Director of Teaching and Clinical Care at Partners in Health, Mexico. I am so excited to be here with our panelists of extraordinary women from different backgrounds and industries to discuss the themes of women and leadership, COVID-19, and gender equity. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected men and women differently. A study shows that women are more vulnerable to COVID-19 related economic effects because of existing gender inequities. This pandemic has also set back the careers of women, especially Black women and women of color around the world. The team of Partners in Health feels that this is a critical moment to amplify the voices of our women leader panelists to empower and illuminating this discussion to aim to advance gender equity across industries and communities around the world. I'm now going to introduce the women lead panelists today join us. Dr. Paula A. Johnson, President of Wellesley College. Welcome. Dr. Ijeoma Kola join us today from Nairobi. She's a public health historian and founder of Cohort Sister. Padma Lakshmi, TV host and producer, author at UNDP Goodwill Ambassador. Thank you for joining us today, Padma. Nadya Okamoto, author and founder of August and Period. Thank you for joining us today, Nadya. Thank you so much, all of you guys, for joining us today in Partners in Health. Now, let's start with the panel discussions. The first question is for Dr. Paula A. Johnson. Doctora, what roadblocks have you overcome through the COVID-19 pandemic? And how has this pandemic opened or closed doors to women and girls' advancement?
Jimena, first of all, it's wonderful to be here today on this very special day to really reflect on women and our future. And, you know, as I look at the pandemic, particularly as a college president, you know, first and foremost, you know, we really had to focus on how to support our students, of course, our faculty and staff, but our students were dispersed all over the world and to different parts of the country, some without resources. And so really part of what we've had to do is to really support our students through this very difficult time, whether it be with mental health, physical health, or really helping them to be able to continue on with the right resources. And then it was a matter of opening up the college and figuring out how we could have a program that was part residential on campus and part remote, but in a way that could advance academics, but also create community. And as we know, this has been a terribly isolating time, and creating the community piece is so critically important to the academic side. And so, you know, I feel very fortunate that both as a medical doctor and with a deep experience in public health, I kind of feel like it was I was able to bring a lot of that experience to Wellesley, and not only to Wellesley, but also to really work in higher ed to help schools who are less well-resourced. And that was really through figuring out how we could all do screening and testing in a way that was affordable. So it's been quite a journey. And as I think about the impact on women, you know, I think you mentioned it, Jimena, the double pandemic of COVID and racism. And as we think about the structural inequalities in our society, you know, this pandemic has made it real for all of us. We've lived it, but I think this just magnified it. We experienced the death of alumni in ways that showed the absolute racism in our healthcare system and in society. We were able to support people through that, but I think really taking hold of that and understanding how we can steer that differently, make a difference. On the positive side, I would say that there are so many students that I've seen and alumni who have really found their voice, who have done incredible work in their communities, who've been on the front lines in healthcare, and so much more. So I think for some, although it's been difficult, there's also been kind of an awakening and an empowerment in many ways.
Thank you so much for sharing. Padma, can you share a bit about the roadblocks you have faced and overcome through this pandemic?
Sure. I mean, for me personally, homeschooling was a real eye-opener. I have a 11-year-old who is in 5th grade. She just turned 11, and I've always loved teachers and really thought that they should be paid way more than they are. But I consider myself a relatively intelligent person, but having to teach my daughter literally 4th grade geometry, from March to June, I have even more of a newfound respect for teachers, because not only are they dealing with everything we're dealing with at home, they also have to be there and be focused for those X amount of hours, when they're with our children. My daughter is in a hybrid program at her school. She goes to the UN school here, and it has been really tough. And, they're doing a valiant job, but those teachers are having to effectively teach 2 groups of students with very different needs, those in person and also those tuning in. And it's different when you're dealing with a child and different levels of attention spans. That hybrid system is not also designed for children with learning disabilities, for example. And so one thing I think that the pandemic has really given me is even more empathy for what different people in different households go through. Professionally, I didn't think we could film, but we actually filmed one of my shows, Top Chef, during pandemic. We filmed in October and November of last year, and we thought that COVID would be our greatest obstacle. My crew is 150 people, and there was we were in this big bubble, but it was very taxing emotionally and physically on all of us, because we were so isolated and yet also isolated from each other. And that was a very big challenge, especially because the show centers around food. And so we had all these protocols that we had to put in place right away. And I just think it was important for us. We just made the decision that we need to put people back to work. And when we did wind up going back to work in October, many of those people had been out of work for 7 or 8 months. And so for us, it became, how can we keep everyone safe, but still keep the engine moving? And I think that is one of the things that you have to look at as a whole in this country, because we know for a fact that more women than men are, women are much more adversely affected with job loss and also, you know, losing their job or having to voluntarily give up their job because childcare is not an option. And so somebody has to stay home. You know, as women, many of us have known for decades that there's so much domestic work that's done that doesn't get counted as work above and on top of our professional lives outside the home. And I think for the first time, I like to see everything as a benefit if looked at the right way. I think you can always find something to learn. I think the one thing that the pandemic has really shown us is how much work it is to take care of children, to educate them, to make sure that they don't tune out. And honestly, I can't blame my daughter. I mean, I'm looking at what she's going through, and I would have tuned out much faster than she did, you know. And I think we've always known these things. We've always intellectually understood that they exist, but to go through them every day and also have your male counterpart also see it, I think is enlightening for many people. And through this adversity, I am hoping that the least we can come out of it with is an enlightenment of what people actually do to keep everything, you know, airborne, so to speak.
I think I'm next. I can go if that works. Yeah, I mean, I think that the last year, as we have heard, has been such an unexpected year of a pandemic and overdue, you know, fight for, I think, intersectionality and racial justice. And just to start with me personally, I think that for me, it was an unexpected time where I was having to grapple with being with myself and in my own thoughts. I'm gonna try not to get emotional, which was really hard because for the last 6 years of my career, you know, I'm 23 now, finishing up my last semester at Harvard. I started a nonprofit when I was 16 and then just kept working and really became addicted to my work because one, I was so passionate about, am so passionate about period poverty. I ran for office when I was 19 and then started a new company. We scaled that. And then in January of 2020, I decided to step away from those things and start raising capital for my new company. And for the last few years, pre-COVID, I was on speaking and book tour, so traveling once to twice a day. And I don't think I realized how much I was running away from a lot of like my trauma and PTSD. And to be honest, it just hit me like a brick wall when everything slowed down because there wasn't really anywhere for me to physically run away to. And I think that for me, I feel like 2020 was such a hard year for so many people. And I feel so privileged and lucky to know that I am healthy and my family is healthy. And I haven't lost loved ones to coronavirus. But as hard as it was, I also think it was a great year of growth. I hit kind of a rabbit hole of mental health, and I spent several weeks last summer in residential rehab. And while I was there, was having to learn a lot about my identity, you know, grappling for the first time with really working through like having complex PTSD and, you know, these different mental health challenges that I had really developed a straight up work addiction with to try to run away from it. And so just to be vulnerable here, I think that it was an incredible year of one, really being pushed to my own limits of self-awareness, and at the same time, a year of great healing. And I feel very, very fortunate to have had access to that sort of mental health support, because I know, especially for so many of my peers who are students and who are alone at home, having that sort of support, whether it be from family or being able to have mental health support like that, is not possible for everyone. And I'm just really, really thankful for that. In terms of how, you know, the overall last year has impacted women and girls, you know, I have devoted my career to the issue of period poverty and stigma, right? And I think that for, when I was on the nonprofit side going into the pandemic, it was huge because we are in the business of human services, right? Trying to make sure that these shelters have period products. And when suddenly the shelters are having to close their doors and less are being able to stay open, also at the same time, we weren't able to have like enough people in our offices and in the warehouse, right? So suddenly the supply chain of being able to distribute products has this interruption, while also at the same time, human services overall, you think about how shelters were impacted and how, these communal spaces that people really rely on were affected as well. And so it was really inspiring at the beginning of 2020 to try to mobilize and get period products out. I've been really inspired by how the nonprofit has continued on past my leadership and is continuing to make an incredible impact. As a survivor of domestic violence and abuse growing up, I think the issue that I hold really dear to my heart is just the terrifying spike of how this has affected domestic violence around the world, and how we're also grappling with the digital divide, right? How are we supposed to think about equality around education when human services are less able to be distributed to the people who need it most, when mental health services are not being distributed to the people who need it most, when we're now relying on digital ways of education, but we're still dealing with the fact that many students who might not have access to internet are having to rely on that for their education. So all that to say, I'm very thankful for the last year of growth. I'm thankful to be healthy. And I think I'm also just taking today to feel so thankful for that, and to be able to even be here with all of you and just inspired by these incredible women. And what better way to celebrate International Women's Day?
Nadya, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for being open to us. Dr. Ijeoma, can you share a bit about the roadblocks you face and your thoughts on the barriers that women and girls face?
Absolutely. So as my previous panelists have shared, I think COVID was both a blessing and a curse for me and many women around the world in various different ways. So I'm a fairly new mom, and my son is a little bit over a year old. So one blessing was that in working from home, I, was able to reduce the anxiety that I was feeling right before I was ready to go back to work of, this question of, do I stay at home, or how many days of the week should I stay at home, or should I get an office outside of the home? But since everyone was now working from home, I was kind of able to mitigate that. So for me personally, it's been really nice to have a culture where a lot of people are at home, and that's kind of normalized. I think that has been helpful for me professionally. On the flip side, a couple of people have already mentioned how being at home has not only compounded women's work, childcare, house care, increased the number of cases of domestic violence. Luckily, I happen to be in a situation where I have a partner at home. I also have full-time childcare, but still, I feel like there's always so much that needs to be done just by being in the confines of our house all the time. And so I really, my heart kind of goes out to women around the world who are struggling, especially on their own, to raise kids. I every time I talk to my mom, I'm like, I do not understand how single moms do it. I just don't get it. It's so hard. And I think that that's something that has really opened up my eyes this period, is the amount of support that is necessary to raise a child, to be a working mom, to be a working woman in a pandemic. So that is how COVID has been a blessing and a curse for me personally. And then more broadly, I think the shift to digital engagement and digital learning. Nadya talked a little bit about this, but for Black women, specifically for Black women in higher education, the pandemic actually created the perfect environment for online communities like Cohort Sisters. Doctoral programs are already such an isolating and individual experience before you even add on race and gender, and just the isolation of doing an academic journey that really you're supposed to produce original knowledge kind of by yourself. And so since many students were no longer in the classroom, they were kind of craving a different kind of community. And Cohort Sisters has been able to fill that void, has been able to provide resources, network, but really a community of Black women around the world who are all trying to pursue or currently pursuing doctoral studies. And we've been able to engage women and support them in those ways. And then I think for women who maybe have been displaced out of the workforce, it's been a time for some people, at least some of our members, they now actually have the flexibility to kind of think about, oh, actually, I've always wanted to go back to school. I've always wanted to get a doctoral degree. I just never really had the time to think about doing that because I, was working. And now that there's a little bit more flexibility, although economically challenging, there's a little bit of more extra time to build additional skills outside of traditional employment or outside of traditional education, and to kind of grow your community digitally in a way that, yes, existed pre-pandemic, but I think is now at the forefront of people's minds, since that's digital. This is how we're communicating right now. That's really the way that people communicate primarily these days. So those are some of the ways that I think that the pandemic has really impacted women and girls in the past year, and impacted myself specifically.
Jimena, can I just add something to Ijeoma's statement? Because I think, what you're saying is so critical, particularly during a pandemic, and thinking about your organization, Cohort Sisters. We know that there's been a very disproportionate impact on women academics, on women in general in the workforce, right? They've dropped out 4 times more likely to drop out, plus all the women on the front lines. But in academia, we know that this pandemic has taken an unequal toll, and we already know that today. We don't even know how far that's going to go. So if you think about that overall, it's going to impact women of color to a greater degree. So having an organization like yours, it's just phenomenal. So just so critically important during this time.
Thank you. So we are still at the beginning of the 2021. Many things has changed. It seems that everything has changed in the last few months. How was the previous US presidential administration affected your careers, growth, and how do you think it has affected women leaders generally? Padma, can you start first?
Sure. I mean, listen, I hate to thank Trump for anything, but I do thank him for making me shake awake with rage and anger. From the very start of the Trump presidency, we saw so many groups vilified, from women to LGBTQ to people with disabilities to immigrants. And, I have volunteered before for political campaigns. I was very involved with the Hillary campaign, but I don't think I took an active role in a much broader variety of issues that concern me. And, one thing that the last presidency did do for me personally is that I hurried up and I became involved with the ACLU because of all this vitriol that was coming out of Washington. I work with the ACLU in immigrant rights as well as women's rights. And the reason I started that is because I kept hearing, how immigrants were rapists and murderers, and having grown up in various immigrant communities, I knew that that was not true, and it wasn't my experience growing up. And also I felt like these immigrant communities needed a platform to speak for themselves, because there are 100 stories and they're not all the same. None of them are the same, and they're all interesting, and they're all the story of America. They are literally the people who build this country, not just in the food industry, but across every industry. And so, when I started working with the ACLU, I started getting knee deep in these immigration issues and really speaking to people and hearing stories and understanding the issue on a much larger scale. And that prompted me to pivot and create another show, which is Taste the Nation. And one of the reasons that I did Taste the Nation was because there was only one narrative about American food being told. And I knew that that was just a slim slice of what American food looked like, who had evolved it to what it was. You know, a lot of the staples that we think of as American are not American at all. So, you know, everybody is either an immigrant or a child or descendant of an immigrant, unless you are from the Cherokee Nation or another indigenous tribe. You too have come here under one circumstance or another. And I just didn't see that representation in my media, in food media. And I wanted it to exist desperately because that's a show I wanted to watch, because that was the food I was eating. That was the culture that I was experiencing. And so were everybody that I knew. And we just didn't see that. You know, when you had travel food shows and people go around the world, it was very a term that I don't like, which is lifestyle, you know, and I didn't want the show to be lifestyle. I wanted it to be something deeper. And I wanted these communities to speak for themselves and teach us about the foods that we eat and love, but also consider the hands that are making this food and how valuable they are to the greater fabric of American culture. And so, you know, I have Trump to thank for that, really. I mean, it's just the blatant misogyny also that this administration made it okay to, you know, come out in the open and be just so aggressive and outwardly racist and homophobic and misogynistic. I mean, I think we don't even know yet the full impact of what this presidency is going to have on, you know, future generations. I mean, just as far as education, you know, Dr. Johnson can, of course, speak better about this than I can, but I think you have to invest way more money and attention and laws into education that we just currently don't have. If you really believe in your country, if you really want to forward the positive evolution of your country, you have to invest in education. It's not that difficult. It's so simple, because in 15, 20 years, these are the very people that are going to be entering the workforce. And then in 30 and 40 and 50 years, but not even in 30 years, these are the people that are going to run your country. So why would you scrimp on how you educate these people? I mean, even all those rollbacks of how difficult it is to report, sexual assault on college campuses, you know, all of that, it was atrocious. Every sector of our country and every part of what government should exist for, to protect its citizens and give the citizens help with what they need, all of those different areas of government have been affected very negatively by this administration. And we have a lot of cleaning up to do that will take us more than just one or two presidencies to roll back. The rolling back of all the strides that we have made, you know, even in the workforce with women and how much we earn, and how are we going to get all those women back to work? You know, we were making some real strides. And I think it's unfortunate, but it's necessary that everyone get involved and everyone pay attention in a way that I don't think we were before 2016. And thank God, with many more women in public office as well. And I hope that that will be contagious and infectious long after Biden's presidency and beyond.
Thank you, Padma. I'm going to jump a little bit to Nadya, and then we are going to move forward with Dr. Johnson. Nadya?
Thank you so much. No, I was just going to build off of what Padma was saying, because I think that what the Trump administration did was, you know, a lot of the rhetoric that they were spewing, right? That was, you know, for us, we can clearly deem as hateful, discriminatory, unjust. I think that the administration was proof to a lot of the world that these aren't new issues. These are issues that have been brewing for centuries in America and around the world. Especially around, you know, as Padma talked about, around rape culture or racism, like this was a wake-up call to I think a lot of people who might not have been exposed to that of, oh my gosh, here's this new figure. How can he possibly say that, right? But I think that there's this also powerful element to recognize that he was elected by a country where there are people that we might not be exposed to. You know, I'm in New York City. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, these liberal bubbles where I'm not exposed to a lot of people who don't agree with me. And with the Trump administration, and then suddenly starting to hear these conversations on social, or even as I was traveling on speaking tour, I started to meet a lot of people who felt that Trump really resonated with them, right? And I think that what the administration did was it did mobilize people on both sides, and was this overall wake-up call that this system is not working for both parties who don't agree, and that there needs to be this fundamental change. And I think that that's how you did see this fire kind of come up around, especially Generation Z activists who were like, this isn't about just pulling seats up to the table. Like, this table isn't working for people, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum, and there needs to be something fundamentally disrupted. And I think that that's not only what we saw over the last year, but that's going to be the big question over this next administration as well, right? And yeah, I just really resonated with a lot of what you said, and it's going to be a very telling next 4 years for sure.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Nadya and Padma. Dr. Johnson, how has the previous youth administration affected student growth or career interest at Wellesley College?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm just going to turn to Nadya because I think she said it, and she's still in college, and I think she represents a whole generation of incredible college students and incredible young women who are coming of age in this era of real disruption, which is in many ways, it was very, very disconcerting, but in many ways empowering in terms of really seeing issues for what they are. And I think really gaining a sense of how to use your voice and your power to actually make it different. Now, as a college president, sometimes that's used against the administration. But what I always say to our students is that we agree with you. We may not get there fast enough for you. But what I can tell you is that your activism is helping us get there faster than we would have, and helping us to see issues in new and different ways. And I think that, remember, I started at Wellesley on the eve of the election. And Hillary Clinton is a Wellesley alumna. So we had 3,000 alums with every major news network in our athletic facility. And it was quite a night. And what I would say is from there, you know, every issue that I think is deeply cared about in higher ed, whether it be immigration, race, ethnicity, diversity, inclusion, LGBTQ issues. I mean, I could go on with the list. We're under assault, and including higher ed being under assault. So I think that in that there was a lot of coalescing of how we view these issues, think about them, but I think most importantly, finding that voice and the power of activism and the power of learning and applying that learning, that education to activism. And in terms of what I've seen our students I've really seen a shift in students really looking for purpose in what it is they're going to do in life. We see many more students being interested in running for office, many students working on the ground in whether it be voter registration, electoral politics, but making a difference in their own hometowns, many of which are, you know, it's a range of places. So I think that there have been many, many challenges, but I think for young people, you know, if we think about everything from Me Too to Black Lives Matter and beyond, it's been quite an awakening, and I think we are going to see this lead to real change.
Thank you so much for bringing that word to the table, activism. Because 50 years ago, this wouldn't be possible if our grandmothers wouldn't throw out themselves to the streets to start their activism. So now I would like to make a question to Dr. Ijeoma. What your advice will be to widening or improving the pipeline for your women of color who are interested in leadership position and entrepreneurship?
Unmuted. So I believe very strongly in the power of education and in mentorship. I was very fortunate to be raised in an immigrant household, in a household where education was valued over almost everything. And both myself and my siblings, my brothers, were educated and encouraged to pursue education equally. And I know that that doesn't happen a lot for a lot of women and girls. So very fortunate for that. But I think that there is so much informal knowledge around education, around entrepreneurship, around leadership that is so often freely shared in spaces that specifically women of color are typically excluded from. So these conversations happen on the golf course, at a country club, in box seats, at a basketball game, and we're not there. So I think it's really important for not only women of color to mentor other women of color, but for allies, for men, for non-women of color to really invest in the mentorship of women of color. And to do so because they, are not trying to, assuage their guilt, but to do so because they believe in the importance of diversity in leadership. They believe that more diverse leadership teams, more diverse educational spaces, more diverse businesses can actually make more of an impact in society. And I think people need to have that core belief first before feeling like the motivation to invest in mentorship of women of color, of women and girls in general. So I think those are two things that are pretty important to me. I think the traditional education system, in one way that Cohort Sisters is really trying to intervene is, we focus on academics as education, and academics is incredibly important. I have a PhD. I clearly value education, but there is a lot of knowledge outside of traditional classroom education. We can teach girls how to be more self-confident. We can teach girls how to believe in themselves. They're not going through imposter syndrome. We can teach them how to be financially savvy so that they have a little bit more economic self-sufficiency. We can teach them to fight back so that to help protect themselves in situations that they might come into. So there's just a lot of other ways that we can educate, really thinking about educating the girl child and educating women holistically and not just academically. So I think that those, both education and mentorship, are extremely important and will help develop the pipeline and nurture the pipeline of future women of color who are interested in leadership positions. But we also have to recognize that the women are there. I think that there's been, some research, or especially in STEM fields, people will say, well, there aren't enough qualified candidates. They're there. People are there. People are willing to learn. They just have to be given the opportunity. And so if we invest in our women of color, if we invest in our girls starting from a really young age, and we nurture their education holistically, and we really encourage them in ways that they might not be able to get at home just because of lack of social capital, which often impacts women of color, then I think that we can expand the pipeline in the future.
Thank you, Nadya. Padma, as a TV host and author, do you have any advice or ideas on how to improve the pipeline for women of color within the entertainment industry?
Well, I mean, yes, if there's a big problem with women of color being included in entertainment, but there's just a big problem about women having equal space. There's so much. I mean, I can talk to you about television and I can talk to you about food. In the food industry, it is so male dominated. It's ridiculous. I think only the military is more male centric than the professional food world, which is quite ironic when you think that most of the food around the world is actually prepared by women. It's just when you want to get paid for that cooking, then it goes to the man. And I think there are a lot of ways that I would encourage people who are already at the apex or, where they want to be in their career in food. When you see all those fancy restaurants, those are white male, usually white male chefs. and who they're mentoring or promoting are other younger white males. I think those men, and in some cases women, need to widen the net of people when they're looking to hire. Hire somebody who doesn't look like you. Hire someone that doesn't cook like you, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because your restaurant or your business will benefit from that. You know, a lot of women don't go into food because the hours suck, frankly. You're on your feet all the time. And it is also very much a physical job. And, you know, it's very hard, especially if you're trying to start a family, to, you know, understand how to maneuver being a parent, being a partner, but also being gone when most families are getting together at the dinner table. And so I think we need to look holistically at the industry, but it needs to come from the men, because they're the ones right now who dominate our industry. That being said, you know, if there are young women who want to go into the restaurant business, I highly advise you to go and seek out the chefs that you admire that are female and, you know, also of color, whether they're male or female, and reach out to them. You know, often women aren't considered for stages or other training programs. And we need to change also the way that we teach food in this country. I want every culinary school in this country to teach about indigenous food, about African American food. You don't have any Southern food without the influence of African American cuisine, and specifically West African cuisine. That is the only reason this country had a rice industry at all, because they were bringing people that they enslaved who were from rice growing countries. We need to know that. You know, my American public school education failed me, because had I known those things, it would have made me more curious to learn about those traditions from the very people that it's been passed down to. And we're all living in these silos. But I really think that diversity and including more women in every industry, not just in mine, is not only the right thing to do, but it's really good for business. You know, I mean, look, I am one of, you know, humbly speaking with great, you know, humility, like I am one of the most famous women in food in the world. My show Top Chef is in 60 countries. I've been on television only with this show for 15 years, but it took me a crazy long time even to get green lit for a show of my own, when I saw other people with, you know, less experience. And when I say less experience, I mean a decade of less experience and less name recognition, who were white males who got their shows greenlit left and right. And they were just derivative shows. I had to pitch 7 different entities before Hulu said yes to Taste the Nation. And you would think that it would be easier for me to get a food show on air because of the success of Top Chef. But it wasn't. It is so hard. So what I say is seek out the people you admire and reach out to them, and don't be shy. Say, I want mentorship. And if you are in any position to mentor somebody else, you know, put it on your social media, put it out there to all your friends, and try to look for those people who you can help. You know, we often say you can't take it with you about wealth. You also can't take your experience with you when you die. And the best thing you can do, and the only way you can have immortality, is to give your knowledge and your experience and the lessons that you have had to painfully learn, you know, to other people, so that they can carry on the work that you tried to do. It's, you know, that to me is what we all need to think about. You know, that's how I'd like to think about legacy in the next 20 years of my life and my career. What can I do to make more use of everything that I've been through, so that it's helpful to others who will come after me, so that they don't have to go through the bullshit that I did, so that hopefully they get further than I got, because I'm just leaving it somewhere. I'm not taking it with me.
What powerful message. When I hear your stories, I feel this emergency for changing the narrative that has been ruling the world. So the fourth question is, and this is one of my favorite questions, how do you see society benefiting from more women in leadership positions? Please, Nadya, can you share?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is such a great question. I feel like it really comes down to the fact that, you know, an aim of any sort of governmental system should be this representative democracy, right? This idea that the people who are elected or, you know, chosen to represent constituents for their needs, to support lifestyle. And when we're looking at a population that is, by the way, majority women, that should be represented all the way to the top, and it's not. And, you know, I think I have felt this very much in my own life, both on the work side, but especially when it comes to policy advocacy. A really key part of my work has been around advocating for period health, access to period products, period health education, not just about period products, but also about period pain, endometriosis, uterine fibroids. And, you know, one of the key issues that I focused on was the tampon tax. When I started my work in this period space in 2014, 40 states in the US had a sales tax on period products, considering them luxury items, non-essential goods. Meanwhile, products like Rogaine and Viagra are considered medical necessities and don't have that tax. And when you think about why our society thinks of period products as non-essential goods, luxury items, right? You know, same thing with food stamps not covering period products as necessities. Same thing as how we're still fighting for basic, adequate access to period products in prisons, in shelters, in schools. It really comes down to like who's making those legislative decisions, right? My favorite quote over the last couple of years is that a GOP lawmaker in Maine blocked a bill for period products being free in prisons because he said prisons aren't meant to be country clubs, and offering period products in prisons for free would make them country clubs, right? And so I think that a lot of what, you know, me and my team and what this movement is fighting for is this fundamental change that periods are natural, right? Periods make human life possible. Whether you get a period or not, you either know someone, you love someone, or you come from someone who had a period. And at the same time, menstrual hygiene is not a luxury, it is a right. And even when we think about it from the global scale, this basic biological function that is so powerful and so natural should not be a leading cause of absenteeism for girls, women in school, to have economic mobility, to have social mobility. And to be honest, that's why I really care about this issue. Like, for me, this is not just about periods. For me, this is about the overall fight for gender equality. And when you look at how any global organization, whether it be the UN or the World Health Organization, define gender equality, it really comes down to these four factors that go into buckets of education, healthcare, economic mobility, and representation in politics and decision-making. Well, period poverty and stigma have been central reasons that block progress in all of those areas. I mean, in 2016, we saw major media outlets write about how Hillary Clinton could not be president because she would be menstruating for 1/4 of the time. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton was about a decade too old to get her period, which also just goes to show the need for more period health education and all of that. But all this to say, like, when we ask ourselves why do we need more women in positions of leadership, it's the same answer to why do we need people of any marginalized experience represented at that table? Because fundamentally, if any group of people is supposed to be impacted, then they should be represented at the table where that discussion is happening. And I think that that's a change that we're going to see in all industries. And I think that periods are just kind of one of the areas where that need is so clearly shown.
Thank you, Nadya. Dr. Johnson, how do you see society benefiting from more women in leadership positions?
Yep. You know, I think it's been said so well by Nadya, and I'll just say that, look, we've had now years and years of research that has shown absolutely that when women are in leadership positions, and that's whether it's in their communities and regions and states or countries, that there is thriving that happens in a way that is different from male leadership. And it's a greater focus on the greater good. And we've shown over and over that that leadership of women really leads, whether you look at the C-suite and corporate outcomes and boards, down to, again, communities thriving and the issues that get invested in. Women's voices make a difference. So, having more women in leadership is not a nice to have, but I think we have to view it as essential, truly essential to the future of our world. And that's how strongly I feel about it. And getting to the various voices and just thinking about how they make a difference. I'm going to think about my own field as a cardiologist and a person who focused on women's health. We've shown, and we fought for years to get women included in adequate numbers in studies, to get female animals included, to get female cells included in studies, and to have the data analyzed so that we would understand just some basic facts about women when it comes to our very advanced medical science. Well, one thing, it still doesn't happen to the degree that it needs to. And what we've seen from the science is that when there's a woman who's both the first author and the last author, the likelihood of the data actually being stratified or data being shown for women is multipliers higher when you have a woman as a first author and a last author. So it matters in the way that we ask the scientific questions and analyze the scientific data. And, we were able to get some changes really enacted at NIH, but that's only going to happen. It's only going to be as good as the activism and the work and the leadership that's going to watch over and make sure that it happens. So, I just want to leave us with essential to the future of the world.
Thank you so much for your powerful words. It is so powerful when women gather together to share experience. Thank you so much. Our fifth and final question is, what do you want young women and girls to gain from this year's International Women's Day? Nadya, can you answer first, please?
Oh my gosh, this is a really big question. I think it was touched on earlier today, but I think that mentorship is so incredibly key, right? Because, and I say all this to my young Gen Z, Gen Alpha peers out there, because I do think that there has been this rhetoric, especially in the last year, of, the adults haven't taken care of these issues. We know best. We're going to take charge, right? And while I think that we do need to activate, I cannot stress enough the importance of intergenerational collaboration. And I do think that mentorship is not just one way. It is a symbiotic relationship where we are all learning, right? I think that a key thing that older generations can learn from Gen X or Gen Z is the importance of intersectionality and the importance of really questioning things like gender as social constructs, right? And so I think that for me, I completely attribute so much of my journey to having mentors who are older than me, who are younger than me, right? We have an incredible team member with my company, August, and she's in middle school. She's absolutely killing it. And she schools me every single day on how I think about storytelling in the digital space, right? And I think at the same time, we are looking at this fourth wave feminism, right? Which is all about intersectionality. And I think pushing back on this notion that there is any sort of one size fits all solution to fighting for gender equality or women's empowerment or equality in general, right? It's really this understanding that we're beautiful because of our differences. And it's not about being colorblind or not thinking of gender when we're having these interactions, but really acknowledging our differences with the utmost respect, acknowledging how we don't live in this meritocratic society because privilege does exist, and it does exist in so many different ways, and building solutions in a way that takes all of that into account and thinks about how are we going to support people who are in need to come be not just on the same playing field or anything like that, but given the resources to really succeed when we're all here fighting for justice together. So I would say learn, be hungry to learn from others. And also as young people today, I think that the world needs to stop just asking us what we want to be when we grow up, because the reality is we have the tools, especially in the US with smartphones and internet, to mobilize and make a difference right now. So I won't ask you what you want to be when you grow up. I will ask you, what are you doing right now? What are you passionate about? And what are you going to do about it right now?
Padma, can you share your hope for young women and girls?
Sure. I mean, for me, you know, earlier somebody mentioned imposter syndrome. I certainly suffered from imposter syndrome way longer than I think I should have in retrospect. And so what I would like young women to glean from, you know, all the talks that are invariably going on in different corners of the internet today is that don't expect to be perfect. Just expect to be the best that you can be in your chosen field or passion. And please understand that the men that get these jobs are not always very intelligent. They're just men, you know? And so I hate to say it like that, but, you know, not everybody winds up being concerned about being perfect. You have to just try really hard, because there's so many positions that go to males that we are just as qualified, if not overqualified for. And we have to start believing that in ourselves and going after those jobs. There's nothing magical about person A versus person B who are of different genders. It's just, we have to go around. Sometimes we have to be like water, go over the rock, under the bush, all of it, you know, because it won't be easy. I mean, I give you a perfect example, which is this person named Madison Cawthorn. You know, he's this US representative who's 25, and I think he has one semester of college, and he's lying about you know, participating in the Paralympics. I think, you know, if that guy can get elected, anybody can get elected, and people should try. I think a lot of women assume, which I did too, I say this from personal experience, that I'm not qualified enough, or I don't have the experience, or I haven't been mentored, or all of that. But, you know, as someone else said, education comes in a lot of different forms. And I think that women and young women and girls need to just dream a bit bigger to start out with. You know, often we are dissuaded from going into certain careers or discouraged from really thinking big. You know, I have friends who have children who are fraternal twins, and I've watched them from kindergarten, and I watch how people speak differently to Owen than they do to Kai, you know, and just because Kai is female and Owen is male, and they'll say to him, "Oh, you're so brave," and they'll say, "Oh, you look so pretty," to her. And actually, you know, it's just ridiculous. And it happens in kindergarten. And I've seen it with my own eyes. And so I think we have to find somewhere deep within us the will and the gumption to say, you know what, screw it, I'm going for it. I'm going to educate myself and get as much experience along the way as I can, but I'm going to let someone else tell me no. I'm not going to tell myself no before I even get started. I think that is the biggest thing.
Thank you so much, Padma. Dr. Johnson, any advice to the young women and girls who are tuning in?
Yeah, I'm just going to be really brief. You know, I think that this year's theme is achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world. And, you know, we know that it's a day to remind ourselves that gender inequality is really one of the greatest challenges in our world. And what I really hope for young women and girls is to really, for them to see themselves as the change makers that can truly make equality possible, and to embrace that role and to embrace that possibility.
Thank you. Dr. Ijeoma, we will let you have the last word.
Wonderful. So Padma said something that was really funny about imposter syndrome. I can talk about imposter syndrome for a very long time, but a personal motto of mine that I like to remind myself when I am feeling less than, when I'm feeling like I can't do something, and I've shared this with other people in Cohort Sisters, so I'll now share it with everyone here, is to have the confidence of a mediocre white man. Just embrace that confidence. and do it. But so aside from having that kind of confidence, and another suggestion or something that I want young women and girls to take away from this time, this season that we are hopefully coming out of, is to feel hopeful about the future. I think one of the struggles of 2020, especially at the height of the pandemic, was that there was this feeling of hopelessness that this was just now how our lives were going to be forever. We were never going to go outside again. We're never going to be able to hug our family members who lived halfway across the world again. But I'm hopeful that things are turning around and looking on the brighter side. So I want women and girls who may have felt this past year that they've been set back, or they've lost opportunities that they would have potentially had, or they've been overburdened with childcare or home care, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their inability to pursue their dreams, to not give up hope, to not give up on your goals, to not give up on your dreams. 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hopefully in the past, and we're able to move forward. But that's something I definitely want to remind young women and girls, is to just remain hopeful and continue pursuing your dreams with the confidence of a mediocre white man.
Thank you so much. What a powerful and illuminating discussion. Thank you so much to the panelists for sharing with us today. Thank you so much for being here with us, building sisterhood, sharing knowledge, sharing everything that you have learned through your lives. I know this panel has inspired women and younger and every person tuning in right now from around the world. There's a narrative that there's an emergency to change a narrative currently all around the world. Gender equity is something we all should be advocating for. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much. In closing, we have a special message from Tsion Yohannes Waka, the chair of gender equity at the University of Gender Equity in Rwanda.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in today for PIH's Women's Lead event in honor of International Women's Day. My name is Tsion Yohannes Waka, and I'm the chair for the Center for Gender Equity at the University of Global Health Equity, known as UGHE. The university is a PIH initiative that was founded in 2015 in partnership with the government of Rwanda. We have offices in Kigali, Rwanda's capital, and the UGHE campus is about 3 hours north in the rural community of Butaro. I'm joining you today from Kigali, and I'm celebrating this moment with all of you as we push forward the global agenda for gender equity in leadership. Here at the Center for Gender Equity, we have a huge focus on women in our curriculum, and we are currently planning advanced courses on gender equity. The team here is also concentrating on a mentorship program where highly experienced global health leaders, including UGHE faculty members, share knowledge and expertise with a selected cohort of 25 mentees. And most of these are women scholarship leaders or graduates from UGHE's MGHD program. I'm thrilled to be part of this UGHE's cross-cutting gender agenda, which is at the heart of everything we do, including education, research, organizational and community-led activities, and more. Achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world won't be easy, but with women leaders like the ones we have today on the panel, and women leaders at PIH and UGHE, we can take big steps together to make the world more equitable. Thank you for joining us today, and keep on shining and growing. I would like to wish a wonderful International Women's Day to our audience, women and girls across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you have enjoyed the words of Dr. Tsion Yohannes. Thank you again to the panelists for joining this Partners in Health Women Lead event today. We appreciate the time you have taken to be with us. Gender equity, as I said before, is something we should all be advocating for. As I said before, I know this panel inspired women and younger around the world. I'm sure this panel has also inspired everyone around the world to keep this movement alive. Thank you so much. Hasta luego.
Thank you for having me. It was a privilege to be with all of you.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Imagine a world where healthcare is not a privilege, but a human right. Where care is not conditional, but guaranteed. Where no patient is left behind. For more than 30 years, Partners in Health has made it our mission to create this world. From the bedside to the halls of power, we have spoken up when world leaders fell silent, taken a stand when others wouldn't, delivered care once thought impossible, because healthcare can't wait, and neither can justice.